His Mars is born retrograde. It went direct in 1865. So he's 9 years old. And do we have anything there? 1865, he started secondary school in Vienna. His parents were not working, and he finally had to change jobs, and finally ended up in Vienna. Then it went forward. Then it started going forward. He started high school. By 1870, it's back where it started. It's like his Mars went back into other things from another lifetime. It's like an old Oedipus, old sexual things, old things. His energy was caught up in the past. And before his lifetime, it came back to its own place in 1870. And 1870, we don't have anything written down, but he was the excellent student, but that's his secondary school, high school thing. Then it goes forward. And it's not till 1924 that it goes into the 12th house, 1924. So in 24, that was 1923, he had the surgery that removed some of his jaw. So the Mars in Venus, the Mars in Libra ruled by Venus is going into the 12th house. He has his cancer and his surgery. And it would be in the 12th house the rest of his life. So these were just little interesting things. I mean, you could take and look at that degree that Mars was going retrograde and look at the hexagram for that degree. I know we're not going to do that, but that would be an interesting thing to understand that deeper. Okay, so this is all the progressions for 5 years, 5 years before, 5 years after. So from 1902. So there was the progression to the natal. Mercury went into Gemini 2002, 1902, and he'd already published his book on interpretation of dreams. Then Mercury in March 1902, Mercury squared his Jupiter. So this is still before he met Young, and there's nothing said. I don't have anything from his history. There's just a struggle to thinking things through, and I struggle to understand his knowledge to his understanding. And I think the Mercury hitting the Jupiter, the Mars, and the Saturn, the Sun did, the Venus went, the Venus did, like they all went over. He's had a thorough lesson in Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, the effects of projection, aggression, sexuality, the understanding of too much, the understanding of restraints, repression, and the emotional satisfaction or content or discontent that comes from that as the foundation of neuroses and complexes that people have socially. So then by March, Saturn squaring, progressed Saturn squaring his Mars. So this is a long-term thing, the progressed Saturn squaring the Mars. That would have been there for years before this and years after this. So this is partly feeling old. He's doing his work. He has there's a serious mode to him, to what he's doing. At 1905, the progressed Sun squared Mars. So there's a bit of it's hitting the Mars. So there's still a struggle going on within this. It's fighting with the aggression. What am I going to do? What I'm doing? Where am I going? And there was a struggle there. Then the Venus conjunct to Saturn in 2006. And so transiting Saturn, like just the worry about being old, like feeling old, I'm not appreciated, no students, nobody's really following my stuff, I'm just doing it myself, feeling alone and old. Then the Venus hits the Saturn just after that, in the next year, while that's still within the degree of aspect, he meets Young the first time, and he reads into, wow, here's a young person, Venus, to my old person, Saturn, who's coming in, who's going to follow all my works, I'll teach them everything. So as 1907 came in, by April, Mercury's to Saturn. So there's already an inhibition. He's thinking, I got to work to teach this. But by 1908, the Venus, which hit Saturn, was hitting Jupiter, and it started to square. It started to struggle with his understanding of what was right and wrong. He's teaching, he's giving it, but already there were seeds that Young was more into the mystical side of things and not holding straight to the straight analysis of Freudian analysis. So then they traveled to the USA and brought Young with them. That was no big progressions going on. It was still the backup of this struggling of understanding of his exaggerating his emotional expectation. That's the Venus squaring Jupiter, exaggerating the emotional expectation, believing this guy's going to be there. and giving the extra thinking is going to be there. And they had the personal life, they're traveling, they're doing things, they're doing it, and just assuming that this is going to go on forever. And there was two distinct sides to this. By 1910, the progressed sun went into the 9th house. This is beginning to realize the implications, like the principles of living up to your principles or not, and having a student that is or not living up to your principles. So he got stronger on that. By 1911, Venus squared his Mars, and there was this fight between wanting and doing. Things are happening. It wasn't going the way he wanted. And this, I mean, these aspects, it says for a month, but it's really for about a year or so before. And it lasts for a couple of years, each of these things. So they represent the whole phase. As this Venus square Mars was the whole phase of finally ending the relationship. It's almost like a love affair. It's just not working. Why? Again, because, well, his wife accepted when Jung was with other women, but Freud was not able to accept him by him following other ways or other beliefs. And Jung wasn't able to stick and be that dedicated. So by 1913, the progressed Mars went into the 12th house. And by this time, they'd ended the relationship, and he was only going to see him one more time. But he was on his own from there. But this was also tied into his beginning. When did he find out? I'm not sure when he found out he had it wasn't until 22 he was diagnosed with the gum cancer, so it wasn't there. So that was earlier. Yeah, it was just the final stages of ending things, of really ending the things. Then by August, after the last meeting, where Freud fainted had to be carried out, and Jung carried him out, his Mercury went stationary direct. That was the beginning of his mind starting to go forward again, thinking on his own. That's a profound thing. Mercury, you could look at that degree and look at that degree, because Mercury would have been in that degree. That's just at the beginning of it. So it might only have been in that degree, would have been in that degree and the degree before it for 10 years. So you'd have a strong theme, and that would have included his whole time of meeting Freud, there to the completion of the Mercury retrograde. And the symbol there would be really relevant. It would be interesting to do. I'm not doing it here. That's not what I've chosen to do. Okay, so then when we look at the progressed, there was the Mercury progressed the Sun conjunct Saturn in 1905, which was still there when they were meeting, but that was done. So that was the old age complex and trying to live through a young guy. Then Mercury hit his Venus, but then this is progressed. So you're really seeing the moon phases shifting. There's the crescent moon phase starting in 1909. Then the Sun progressed Sun was squaring Jupiter. So that was there before the struggle to understand. But this interesting phenomenon here, by February of 2012, but really 2011, 2012, Venus conjuncted to Saturn, and probably maybe from 2010 till 2015, or to 2014. But Venus conjuncted to Saturn in the progress chart. That was just 1912 in February. If we go back and we look at the progress to the natal chart, Venus conjuncted Saturn in 1906. So just before he met, so his first meeting with Jung was with Venus opposed Saturn. So already he's the old man looking for youth coming in, and he's reading into it. And when you look at the progress, because the progressed Saturn had moved a little bit over those years, in the progress to progress chart, it was there we are. It was in 2012. From 1906 to 2012, the whole time of the relationship was between the progressed Venus conjunct the Saturn, and the progressed Venus conjunct the Saturn, conjuncting the Saturn in the natal chart and conjuncting the progressed Saturn. So that's a good example. Like that whole aspect lasted for 5 or 6 years. The whole time was Venus, progression of Venus to conjunct Saturn, and from the progress to natal, because the natal progress had moved on, and then Saturn caught up, and then Venus caught up to it. So there's that gap, and that gap really represents a very real phase that started with the beginning of being less than satisfying and ended being less than satisfying. And he's an older man and having to go on his own. Then his progressed new moon would kick in, and it would start to begin from there. And there were some struggles to understand this process of Venus square Jupiter, to understand Jung or to realize it and let it go. Okay, so that was really the insights I wanted to get into. A couple of things. You don't know before progressions. You discover things as you're working through them. But the more thorough you get, the more things come up to it. It's not only embellishing, it's really reinforcing what's going on. You're seeing the inner story of what the soul is experiencing while going through these outer transitory functions or crises. Okay, we're going to be about 15, 20 minutes more, if we're lucky. Okay, so this is the printout with the hexagrams of the progressed sun. And his progressed sun in 1901, it reached the 0 degrees. It squared Jupiter, but it was reaching the solstice. It reached the 30 degrees of Gemini, going into the 0 degrees of Cancer by November 1901. And just before this, he published in 1998, his sun was conjuncting Saturn, but he accomplished his work and published his interpretation of dreams in this phase, building up to the most independent. Mercury's ruling in his sign, its rules is building up. It's in the 7th house. He's talking about how dreams affect people and what they mean, and everybody wanted to know about it. He really broke through on things. That was the genius of his independence. This is in the I Ching hexagram called the creative, the most independent time of the year, the greatest brightness of the year. And as Mercury was, he had his most independent, unique insights then. That set the theme for everything. That book, that independent thing, really established. Everything else came from that. It brought out the Oedipal complex. It brought out his sexual complex. It brought out his attitudes because they were used in interpreting the dreams, which was the connection to the individual person. And the working through those and the relevance of those is psychotherapy. It's just that Jung, as he was relating to Jung was into it didn't say at all, there's other things. He was, he was into, you can do tarot, you can do astrology, there's all sorts of other ways to go at this, which is partly true, but Freud was very matter of fact and a very specific thing of how he was working this. And it attracted Freud, it attracted Jung, because it was this book that attracted Jung, the brilliance of it. And then Jung was going in to learn it, but he was really deviating to try and make it work his own way or see it his own way. And he was showing that this is not, I'm learning this, I can see it, but there's got to be more. This can't just be sexual, there's got to be another thing. But it's interesting that Jung's insistence they couldn't all be sexual-based complexes. When Jung was not living responsibly sexually to begin with, he wasn't in touch with that element that well. So he wouldn't want to accept those judgments. It would be too severe on him at the time. The young man, the promiscuous young or dreamy adventure.